word to wise. Grass only greener when it's fertilized. Gave them truth in these songs, they prefer to lies. Destiny beautiful, adrift in her purple lies. You can't see me, you Stevie. Wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Ernie, Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. All right, today's video, we're gonna be talking about something I don't normally talk about very often, but we're trying to change that. We're gonna be talking about a DC Comics comic book by the name of Justice League Incarnate by Joshua Williamson, Dennis Culver, Brandon Peterson, Andre Bresson, and Tom Derenick. And in this video, I'm gonna be doing a little commentary on why Darkseid, one of the most powerful and most dangerous beings in the DC Comics universe, is actually getting to face off with one of the MCU's most popular villains, Thanos. We're gonna talk about all this and more right now, but first, if you wanna see more awesome videos like this one, make sure you hit that subscribe button because I post multiple videos throughout the week, plus live stream the Blerd Cave every Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. That way you don't miss anything. Also, if you enjoy the video, I humbly ask that you Hulk smash that like button because it really helps the channel out. That said, let's talk about Justice League Incarnate number 1. Okay, so what you really need to know if you're interested in any way, shape, form, or fashion in getting into this comic is that the Superman of Earth 23, the Calvin Ellis version of Superman, President Superman, if you're nasty, is trying to bring together all of the different heroes from across the multiverse to try and stop Darkseid from ending every single reality. This comic is going to bring together characters like Captain Carrot from Earth 26, China's version of the Flash from Earth 0, Dr. Multiverse from Earth 8, Dino Cop from Earth 41, Aquawoman of Earth 11, the Thunderer of Earth 7, Mary Marvel of Earth 5, and last but most certainly not least, Batman from the Flashpoint universe. The reason why this comic struck me as interesting because there's a lot of MCU commentary going on in this comic, and I'm here for it. I'm here for it 100% because, as we all know, Marvel and DC Comics have often borrowed ideas from each other. They have wholesale stolen ideas from each other in the past, but in more recent years, that rivalry that Marvel and DC had for decades, or at least in the eyes of fans, this rivalry of sorts kind of went away a little more than 10 years ago. And for all intents and purposes, Marvel and DC are actually quite friendly with one another. And I'm not just talking about movies, I'm talking about the actual comics industry as a whole, because you gotta think about it. A lot of comic book writers, artists, colorers, letterers, editors, so on and so forth, they don't typically just work for Marvel or DC. Sometimes they work for both and even other companies as well. It's actually incredibly uncommon nowadays for a writer or artist or any other creative in the comics industry to only work for one imprint. It's a business model that's kind of going away. But the reason I bring this up is because of two particular characters that exist in both Marvel and DC Comics. The first being Darkseid, who, for those who are not familiar, Darkseid made his first appearance in 1970's Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, number 134. This was one of the biggest bads of the DC Comics universe, created by Jack Kirby, and his legacy is still going strong even to this day. His legacy was so great, in fact, that Marvel high-key borrowed Darkseid from DC Comics and made their own version of him by way of Thanos in 1973's The Invincible Iron Man number 55. Now, this was a Jim Starlin, Mike Friedrich creation who, when he was originally incepted into the Marvel Comics universe, he actually looked strikingly like Darkseid, just more purple. But over the years, he began to cultivate an image that separated himself from Darkseid, and the comparisons became somewhat less so, but they're still there, because in all reality, Darkseid and Thanos are both major villains in their respective comic imprints. This comic kind of plays on that, and we're introduced to a character by the name of Tartarus. Tartarus is, for all intents and purposes, Thanos, albeit he's more the Thanos from the MCU. If you look at him, and this is something I actually joked with Carter from the Blerd Cave about, is that when you look at him, he's basically like if you were playing Marvel vs. Capcom and you picked Thanos, he would be the Thanos you got if you hit R2 instead of the X button. While we don't spend a lot of time with the character character Tartarus. The main deal here is that Tartarus is going to be facing off with DC Comics' Darkseid. Right when Tartarus is starting to get the upper hand on the Retaliators, who are basically mock-ups of the MCU's Avengers, we have a character by the name of Red Dragon, who is basically Black Widow, Deadeye, who is, for all intents and purposes, Hawkeye, Big Baby, who is, for all intents and purposes, the Hulk. We see a version of Thor known as Wundajin, and we also have Silver Eagle, who I guess is supposed to be like Falcon, and there's even mention of a DC Comics version of Tony Stark, whose name gets thrown around more than a few times, named Machine Head. And then we have our Captain America of the group, American Crusader, and yeah, it's silly and really dumb. Tartarus is beating the absolute dog snot out of the Retaliators, and it's gonna take the combined might of the Justice League Incarnate, which are all the different members I mentioned earlier: Superman of Earth 23, Flashpoint Batman, Flash of China, Dino Cop, Mary Marvel, so on and so forth. All of these characters are coming together to try and stop this multiversal threat, and it's at this particular point in time where Darkseid steps into the arena, and we get to see this really interesting battle between these two characters. Tartarus and Darkseid are keenly aware of one another, albeit the Darkseid that Tartarus is familiar with is one from his universe, not Darkseid proper. More specifically, Darkseid has absorbed all of the other versions of himself from across the multiverse, making him an even more powerful threat. They both are throwing their best shots at each other, with Darkseid unleashing his Omega beams, and of course Tartarus unleashing what is apparently supposed to be something similar, or at least something that would remind you of the Infinity Gauntlets, only in this case he's wearing them on both hands. We don't really get to see any specific rings, but we do see he has some level of power that's radiating off of his knuckles where the gems would be, and these are all representative of the rings of power that we would normally associate with the DC Comics lantern rings. And these guys are literally beating the bejesus out of each other until, at the very end of it all, Darkseid determines the real winner in all this. And I want to say this is probably a cheeky little dig on Thanos and his popularity and the quotey fingers snap that wiped out half of all life in the universe, because Darkseid literally snaps Tartarus's neck. They even make sure to put the snap as the onomatopoeia for this particular incident. This is all really interesting to me just because, yeah, these characters have always kind of been compared to one another. It's something that's unavoidable. It was something that even became a point of contention when people were trying to compare Thanos versus Darkseid when it came to the Avengers and the other MCU films, as well as the Darkseid that appeared in the Snyder Cut version of Justice League. This is something that I thought was really interesting because it's one of those things right now where, especially with Marvel and DC playing incredibly nice with one another, they do still take little shots at each other from time to time. This is something that came up during the Heroes Reborn arc that Jason Aaron kicked off earlier this year, where we were reintroduced to the Squadron Supreme on a much bigger level than what we've dealt with them in the past in Marvel, and the Squadron Supreme are basically a darker, more sardonic version of the Justice League and all that that entails. I thought it was really interesting that they actually created this character who is similarly named to Thanos. Their names share a very similar theme, Tartarus being the realm of Hades, the actual underworld where Thanos is very close to Thanatos, which is basically the god of death. And they actually let not Thanos get some licks in on Darkseid, but ultimately Darkseid is the winner here because why wouldn't he be? This is DC Comics. If it was the other way around, if it was Marvel doing this, then whoever would be the not Darkseid would probably be the one who lost. Now, it's not the first time these two characters have interacted with one another. Way back in 1996's Marvel Comics versus DC crossover event and the Amalgam universe that came afterward, we did actually see a brief moment of Thanos and Darkseid staring each other down as though they were getting ready to have the brawl for it all. And while this was something that actually did happen, we never really see what the outcome is of this battling. But I guess it's safe to say that Joshua Williamson and Dennis Culver are giving their 2 cents on how the fight probably would go now. I thought this was a fairly interesting comic. It's not something I was ultimately looking out for, but hey, anytime I can get more President Superman in my life, I'm more than willing to jump on that opportunity. And also, I thought it was really interesting that they kind of took this chance that DC and Marvel have been doing this back and forth for quite a while now, making little teases about future crossovers, or trying to get people talking about potential crossovers in the future. Even though I don't think that they're gonna happen anytime soon, if ever again. I mean, that was a really weird point in comics at that time, and I'm not even particularly fond of the Marvel DC Comics crossover from 1996. Actually, I kind of quite hated it, if I'm being brutally honest. But does this mean we're gonna see a Marvel DC crossover anytime soon? I don't really think so. I mean, yeah, I know a lot of people like to go back to the, what was it, Secret Crisis that was teased in Jeff Johns' Doomsday Clock number 12. I don't think that's going to be the case at all, but you know, hey, one can dream. I know there was some synchronicity with some things that kind of happened around the same time. I think it was honestly just pie in the sky, people just throwing stuff out there to see if anybody would notice. It's all for laughs. Who's to say who would actually win in a fight? Because as I often say, power levels don't mean anything and accomplishments rarely mean anything either. It's usually just up to whoever is writing at the time and whatever makes for the most interesting story. Though I will be the first one to admit, if I had to put my money on anyone winning a fight between Darkseid and Thanos, while I am one of the few people on this earth who probably doesn't need to imagine how powerful Thanos would be without the Infinity Gauntlet, I'm keenly aware of how powerful he can be without the Infinity Gauntlet. He's literally soloed the Phoenix Force without the Infinity Gauntlet. I can imagine the levels of power and cunning that he has at his disposal, but I would still give that dub to Darkseid. And hey, this is coming from the Marvel shill. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, Hulk smash that like button and make sure to share it all over the internet and with all your friends. That way they can know how you leveled up your comic book big brain in regards to Justice League Incarnate and the battle between Darkseid and Quotey Fingers Thanos. On your way out, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know what you thought about Justice League Incarnate #1. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.